Okay, so welcome. We are in Fall into Fat Burning Week 3, and I'm going to share my screen here as we go through sort of a recap of our first 2 weeks. What we want to do is get those principles really firmly in our mind, so as we start to look at applications in the kitchen and how we're going to adapt recipes and choose things out of a cookbook or things in our kitchen, we're going to actually use these principles in how we then work in our kitchen and how we purchase food for what we cook. So if we look at one of the principles that we talked about in the very first week, it was this concept that we need to bust up. It's a farce. It's not completely true. And it's the law of thermodynamics, and it's that a calorie in should equal a calorie out. So that whole idea, if I take in a Starbucks 500 calorie latte, I would need to go exercise 500 calories off in order to get that out of my system. Now, on one hand, there's some ounces of truth, there's little bits of truth to that, but the thing about it is that you almost always will be behind the 8 ball if, in fact, what you're doing is trying to exercise off the food that you eat. It's just literally almost impossible to exercise enough in a day to take off the calories that we would eat in any way that are in excess of our needs. And so I wanted to start with that when we began this series, because we need to get out of the mindset that a calorie in has to equal a calorie out. One of the major things about how we burn calories really is based on our hormones, and in particular insulin. And so we talked a little bit about how the standard American diet and a very typical way of eating, if we're not mindful about this, is that we can eat foods that spike our blood sugar. So like, let's say I have a bagel, even a whole wheat bagel with a little cream cheese on it. It's overwhelmingly going to be a high amount of carbohydrate in that bagel, and that will end up spiking my blood sugar. And then my insulin is going to rise in response to put this high blood sugar away, and I will crash. And when I crash, this low blood sugar stimulates me to crave more food and go hunting for more to eat. And I'll have, again, the same cycle repeat through the day over and over. The problem with this is this insulin level. Not only is blood sugar toxic at high levels, but if an insulin level is sustained at a high level, it causes us to store fat, and it also causes inflammation. So what we're really wanting to be mindful of is, the reason I say a calorie in is not a calorie out is that insulin is a switch, so it depends on the food. If I ate 100 calories of Oreos, for instance, I'm going to have high insulin. Whereas if I eat 100 calories of olives, I'm not going to have high insulin. So the difference is which foods impact our insulin level really ends up being the make or break issue for us on whether or not we're able to burn fat and whether or not we can lower inflammation in our system. So this slide is kind of a key slide. Low insulin levels or low steady levels of insulin will help us burn fat. And high insulin levels, we will burn carbs or sugar, and we will store our fat in our body. So if we want to use that principle, this is what we're going for. We're trying to actually have a steady, low blood sugar that stays stable, somewhere kind of, ideally in the 60 to 100 range would be typical. And for some of you that are diabetic, it may be that it's slightly higher than that. Excuse me. The reason we want that steady blood sugar is the after effects of steadying our insulin. And so if we want to have a steady insulin, we can achieve that by having small, frequent fuelings that are balanced with our carbohydrate and protein load. When we're trying to keep that insulin stable, there's a couple other principles that help us. And I'm going to get some water just a second. Thank you. My handy assistant just got it for me. Sorry if you ever had a throat that just gets drier and drier. Jeez. Okay, we'll see how the voice is sounding here. So, to keep insulin stable, portions are part of the story, and you can help yourself by using a 9-inch plate and by eating small, frequent meals. Like Ellen was talking about, setting a timer so that every 3 hours she's doing a small fueling. that allows you to have a small input of calories and a small input of food that raises the insulin just a little instead of these big spikes. And then the balance of the three main food groups, the carbohydrates, fat, and protein, becomes really critical in how we can keep insulin stable. And that's actually what we're going to talk about for the rest of the evening tonight. So in week 2, we talked about the 15-gram secret. This secret is that your net carbohydrates per time that you eat, if you keep those under 15 grams, you're going to not raise your blood sugar and you're going to not develop high cholesterol or store fat. And then the second part of that is that you want to keep your protein either higher than the carbohydrate count or within 5 grams of your carbohydrate count. Let me give you an example. If I have a fillet of salmon and it's 25 grams of carbohydrate, 25 grams of protein, did you guys catch me? It's basically has no carbohydrates. And so that food is fine. It's higher than 15 grams, it doesn't matter, it's just the protein. But when we're looking at our starches, so if I had a baked potato or a side of rice or even a sweet potato, if I have more than 15 grams of net carbohydrates in that meal, I'm going to store the excess of those carbohydrates and my blood sugar will go up. So why are we wanting to follow this path or follow this sort of strategy? It keeps our blood sugar stable, which in turn keeps our insulin response minimal. So we're just trying to keep insulin barely bumping along a little bit for each little fueling that we eat, but not a lot. That helps us keep our inflammation lower and helps us not store fat. And when we don't store fat or have an excess beyond that 15 grams of carbohydrates, we also don't make extra cholesterol. So this is also actually sort of the key factor in how I work with people around lowering cholesterol naturally, is this whole same concept. So the formula of how we're going to do this, when we apply it to a label, which is what we did most of week 2, we applied this formula to labels. We looked at total carbohydrates in grams and total fiber in grams. And if you subtract the fiber from the carbohydrate, that's your net carbs. So if I have 15 grams of carbohydrate and 5 grams of fiber, my net carbohydrates would be 10. And I compare that to the total protein in grams. And either the protein should be higher than my carb count, or it should be within 5 of my net carbohydrate count to be a food that's going to keep my blood sugar balanced and steady. So I'm going to stop sharing our screen so we can talk about how I kind of apply this in preparing meals or things that I cook in our kitchen. There we go. Okay, so if we look at what we're going to do when we're prepping meals or trying to put together some of the basics in the kitchen, I want to show you a couple processes. And the reason I do this is we're all a little different. Some of us are scientists at heart and we want to get into the kitchen and maybe we love cooking or we love creating in the kitchen, and you want to know how you can adapt a recipe, or you want to know how to choose a recipe that you're going to work with in the kitchen. And so for those of you that like to do that, I'm going to show you a method of how to do that. And then for those of you who could care less, that go, you know what, just give me something healthy, I want to eat it. Or give me the recipe already figured out so I know that this one's safe and I can do it, that's fine too. And we're going to send as our attachment out later in the week. This week it'll be some recipes that will have the grams of fat, fiber, carbs, and protein, so you can see that we've set them up to be within the 15-gram secret. So a couple options. I want to just show you a couple things I do. My common scenario, this is an example of something I've worked on, and I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see it. This is a recipe for chocolate protein waffles with strawberries. They're gluten-free and dairy-free. And down here, where all the ingredients are at the bottom, you can see what I've done over here. And what I did was literally for every item in the recipe, I've listed the grams of fat, the grams of carb, the grams of fiber, and the grams of protein. So it lets me start a mathematical list where I can go, okay, these 4 eggs have 13 grams of fat, or excuse me, 20 grams of fat, no carbohydrates, and they have 24 grams of protein. So the contribution to the recipe from 4 eggs is that many grams of each of those items. And then I add them all up at the bottom, and I total the amount for the entire recipe. So this particular recipe ends up where in calories, the whole recipe, if I make this whole batch of these waffles, is going to be 1,100 calories. It's 1,168 with 55 grams of protein in the whole recipe and 53 grams of carbs. Now, the way I got it to that was I made sure that I was using high protein items in my pancakes. So for instance, there's not regular flour in here. There's almond flour and protein powder in these pancakes. But when I look at that and then I broke it out to where each pancake, I could figure it out, it meant that every pancake had 13.25 grams of carbohydrates, 3 of fiber, and 13 of protein. So that was 10 of net carbs and 13 of protein. This fit my profile. So in other words, I looked at this recipe, I'm like, that might fit. It has almond flour instead of wheat flour, and it has a quarter cup of protein powder in this recipe. And it turns out this makes a really nicely balanced waffle. So this is one of the recipes we'll put into the mix that we'll send out to everybody. So if we kind of think about how we would do this to different recipes, I want to just mention a couple other things that I've tried this week that were handy. One of my favorite new cookbooks is this book that's called Sweet Laurel, and it's desserts and lots of different all kinds of bakery goods that are all gluten-free. Now, they are not all abiding by the 15-gram secret. So when I looked at this, I had some bananas that needed used up this weekend. So I'm like, okay, what can I do that would make banana bread adhere to the 15-gram secret? And so this banana bread recipe in here used wheat flour, and it already used maple syrup instead of brown sugar, so it was a lower content of sugar. But I adapted this recipe and made 2 different things with it. So I made banana bread that I ended up cutting into bars like this. And the reason I did that was 2 bars of this banana bread fits the 15-gram secret. So these 2 bars are under 15 grams of net carbohydrates and have about 9 grams of protein in them. And so I can eat these 2 bars that taste like banana bread. They're not as sweet as my mother-in-law's banana bread, where I learned how to make banana bread, but they're good. They taste like banana. I've got a few pecans in them. They're really yummy. And I can have those 2, say with my coffee for breakfast, and I've had a 15-gram secret breakfast. And it's easy. And I ended up throwing these in Ziploc bags with 2 of them in a Ziploc bag in the freezer. So I can grab 2 and I go, and by the time I get to work, they're thawed and I can have them with my coffee. Or if I'm eating them at home, I just pull them out and put them on a plate. Now, the other thing with this recipe, I had made this one time last week, so I knew I had some leeway of what to do with it. And so I tried one other thing. I thought, I've got this extra pureed pumpkin in the fridge. I have 1 cup of pumpkin. I wonder how many grams of carbs the pumpkin has in it, and if I could substitute pumpkin instead of banana. But when I made this recipe, I had taken out, I didn't put any maple syrup in the one with the banana in it, because the bananas were going to make it sweet enough. So I eliminated the sugar, which eliminated a lot of carbs. So when I was going to do it with pumpkin, I thought, okay, this is going to have no sweetness in it unless I add something. And so I looked, and 1 cup of pumpkin actually has only 20 grams of carbohydrates and some fiber in it. And so I thought, okay, in this particular recipe, I had room for 50 grams of carbohydrate to balance my protein. So the bananas had come up to 50 grams of protein with 1 cup of mashed banana. So instead, I used 1 cup of pumpkin, and I added 2 tablespoons of molasses, which added the remainder of the carbs up to 50. So I stayed even on all the carbs that were in the deal, and I used pumpkin and some molasses. So with doing that, I ended up making these, which are little triangles of basically a pumpkin spice bread. I put pepitas on the bottom, which are also glycemically balanced, so they have a little crunch. And 2 of these also is now a 15-gram little meal. So I can have 2 of these again with my coffee if I want a different flavor. If you're not a banana bread fan, for instance, you can do a pumpkin spice bread. And so I'll send that recipe out because it actually turned out great. I was really happy with it. And kind of thought, okay, this was a good adaptation. Everybody in the family thought they tasted great. They weren't too wild and wacky. And it ended up that every one of those items, if I read for you what's in them, every one of them had, so one of these little squares like this is 4 grams of protein and 5 grams of net carbohydrates. So I was like, okay, that worked. And that made a really easy breakfast meal. Now, another breakfast meal that I think is a really super simple thing to start, even if you're not a baker or a cook, is a chia pudding. And one of the great things about chia seeds is that the slime, so to speak, that would come out on a chia seed if you soak them is soluble fiber. And soluble fiber binds to cholesterol, it binds to bile salts in our gut, which are made of cholesterol. So if you can eat lots of either soaked chia seeds or lots of soluble fiber, you will lower your cholesterol. So I use that as another tactic in our office when I'm working with cholesterol. So chia pudding is an easy way to do this. And there's a lot of seeds that are tiny. So chia seeds would be a good example where, because the seeds are so tiny and hard, it's hard to get the nutrition out of them. And so I suggest soaking them and keeping some soaked chia seeds. And you can soak them in coconut milk or almond milk in your fridge. But when you do that, it allows you to have chia seeds that are pre-softened, and you can either throw them in your smoothie or shake in the morning, or you can do this pudding like I do. So to make the pudding, it's really simple, and I'll send this recipe also. In this case, this is what I happen to have. I have a coconut milk from Trader Joe's. You could use an almond milk or a canned coconut milk if you want a higher fat content. And I put 1/4 cup of coconut milk in a little tiny jelly jar, and any bowl will do, whatever your little containers you can put in the fridge. So 1/4 cup of coconut milk or almond milk in a little cup. And then I added 1 scoop, so here's my scoop, and I added a scoop of protein powder that equaled 10 grams of protein. In this situation, I actually used a chocolate protein powder. If you're on Optavia and have Optavia shakes, this is a great way when you're in transition and maintenance to upgrade or to keep using your shakes to make a product that's a little bit higher in calories as you're needing more caloric intake during maintenance. So I added this 1 tablespoon of chia seeds. You can kind of see them here. They're little tiny, tiny black seeds. And the 1 scoop of protein powder. And I have this handy dandy little tiny whisk that will fit in my little containers. So I just mixed it up. So here's my chia seed pudding. Right now it's not pudding yet. It's still just liquid with chia seeds in it, but it has my 10 grams of protein from my protein powder, plus it had another 4 grams of protein from my chia seeds, and it has 5.5 grams of fiber. So this is going to end up being, if I look at the net content of this, it's a little higher in fat than you'd want to use if you're on the Optavia 5-in-1. So this is a good maintenance food, or if you're in a keto approach, this is fine. It has 8.5 grams of fat in this little serving, 8 grams of carbohydrate, 5.5 grams of fiber, and 12 of protein. So this ends up only having 3 grams net carbohydrate and 12 of protein. So the protein is higher and it fits. So what I do with this is I screw a lid on, I put this in the fridge and let it sit overnight. And when I wake up for breakfast, this is my meal, because I've got my 10 grams of protein, I've got my chia seeds, I've got my fiber, I've got my milk in there. If you're in maintenance, you can go with a higher amount. This is just a really nice amount, for a small snack. So this would be a great mid-morning snack if it isn't your breakfast, for instance. If we look at a couple other things about recipe changes, when I sent out that list this last week, and Robert asked a couple minutes ago, did everybody get that? When we sent out that list, there were some things I want to mention that deserve honorable mention that help you balance recipes. One is hemp seeds. So hemp seeds are available they're available in the regular grocery store. Some places call them hemp hearts, and they're raw shelled hemp seeds. Trader Joe's has them, all of our Whole Foods and health food stores, and now even I think Walmart is maybe where I got this, and this, or Costco. So one of the things that's awesome about hemp seeds is that every 3 tablespoons of hemp seeds has 10 grams of protein. So you've heard me say that when we're eating 5 to 6 small fuelings a day, you ideally would want 10 grams of protein per fueling. So 3 tablespoons of hemp seeds does that for you. So if you're having a salad and you need to boost your protein, sprinkling 3 tablespoons of hemp seeds on top of your salad would be an easy way to do that. Or if you're making a muffin recipe where you're trying to balance out your protein and carbs, the hemp seeds help me with that. Like I have another recipe here that I'll include that is a gluten-free protein muffin that's a different version than the other one I showed you, and it's hemp seeds that actually helps me pull that one up into compliance. Almond flour is another incredible tool. As long as you tolerate almonds, fine. Almond flour is a very high protein flour option. And so you may have to play with your recipe a little bit because gluten is different. You know, like a wheat flour has a different consistency than how almond flour works. What I'm noticing is that you end up using about half as much almond flour as you would if it were wheat flour. But it's high protein, and so you can mess around a little bit. I suggest quartering or halving your recipe if you're taking an old family recipe and you're adapting it and trying almond flour in it. Make a small batch because that way you won't waste your ingredients if you end up not liking it. But almond flour is a great sub in to help you create a higher protein meal. When I made that banana bread and those pumpkin muffins, that's what made it, was the almond flour is where we got our protein. So it ended up that almond flour contributed like 25 grams of protein, and eggs contributed part of the rest, and protein powder contributed the rest. My favorite protein powder for baking is this one. And for those of you on Optavia, this is what you're going to do when you move into maintenance. It's not what you need when you're on program per se, but this is by Source Naturals. It's called True Whey, and it's lightly sweetened with some stevia and has vanilla flavor in it. But True Whey protein powder, what I like about this is that it's extremely mild in its flavor. It doesn't taste like I've got a weird protein powder in my food. So I use this protein powder in baking pretty extensively. One of the first forays that we made into learning this in our family was about 8 years ago. Robert figured out how to make pancakes using this protein powder. So he would take like a healthy gluten-free protein or gluten-free pancake mix, and he would put in 1/3 less of the dry ingredients and add make up the third with this protein powder. And by doing that, we ended up with high protein pancakes that were great. The other thing, if you're still eating cereal, which you all know that I generally say don't eat cereal, it's not a good food. But if you're eating something, even if you've made sort of a nut and seed granola for breakfast and you want to put higher protein into that meal, you can mix a scoop of this protein powder with your milk or non-dairy milk and boost your protein in your milk that you're going to put on that kind of paleo granola. So it's another option. I'm just going to check and see what our chat box says as far as maybe a question there. Ellen, thank you. Does using less flour with the almond flour make your batter runny? You guessed that you might need to decrease the liquids. You actually may not need to decrease the liquids. It's amazing to me. The only decrease in the liquids I did was I didn't use the maple syrup, but I used an extra egg. So I ended up sort of compensating. I used more liquid in the egg and less in the sugar source, the maple syrup. And then it was half as much flour as a typical banana bread recipe. So it worked out. And I think it's just because the almond flour is more absorptive. It just absorbs a lot. Kind of has like a sponge effect a little bit. One other thing I want to show you is a product that we make ice cream with. So those of you on Optavia, there's a couple hacks I want to tell you for when you're on the 4-in-2 or the 5-in-1. One is that even though some of the Optavia products are labeled soft serve, so there's a chocolate soft serve or a peanut butter soft serve or a coffee soft serve, those are great to make in the blender with a little bit of ice, and you put your packet of powder in there and about a 1/4 cup of water and blend, and you'll have a nice soft serve ice cream. And for all of us that love ice cream, and it's like, who doesn't love ice cream? That is a great ice cream fix. It's like you can have your soft serve and enjoy that and feel like you've got your little dessert treat in your last meal of the day on Optavia, or if you're wanting that as a midday snack. But there's another hack when you're in maintenance that I want to show you that's helpful, and that is that if you find a protein powder that has some coconut oil in it, it will not clump up as much, and you can make a high protein soft serve even with other protein powders, especially if they have some MCT oil in them or coconut oil in them. The one other thing that I want to show you that's an easy fix with some of your Optavia products, if you have Optavia shakes and you're kind of unsure what to do with them, maybe you're shaked out, right? You're kind of sick of them and you're wanting something a little different. One of the things that we do a lot at our house, I'll do it either with, this is actually a box of the Optavia pancakes, and I'll do that with the Optavia pancakes, and sometimes even mix it up and mix like one pancake packet with something else that's like a tropical fruit flavor. There's a tropical fruit smoothie. I'll mix the two of those together and make it into 2 meal replacement containers, and then it's kind of like a tropical pound cake. So I like doing that, where you can mix 2 flavors of your Optavia products and then have 2 meal replacements out of that, you know, or because you've mixed them and put them into 2 different separate containers, but have a little change up in the flavor for you. The other thing is you can take any Optavia shake and you can add actually an eighth of a teaspoon of baking powder, and you can then spray your little Optavia cup that comes with your food. You can spray it with like a spray. Hi, George. Sorry, it's Geraldine. Nice to see you. So you can spray your little Optavia cup with a coconut oil or an oil spray, and then pour your shake that you've added that little bit of protein or of baking powder with the shake. Put it into your little container and microwave that, or bake it. We'll take a whole pack and bake 6 of them at a time so that we're set for the week, because they end up setting up a little nicer in the oven even than the microwave. But you can take any shake and do that as a switch over and make it into like a muffin. So it makes kind of like a little soft bread muffin that's really easy to do. When I'm looking at savory items, so let's think about main meals for just a minute. With main meals, and some of the lists that I sent out last week, I'm going to send you recipes for things that are on there, and there's another section that we'll send this week that's recipes that are 15-gram secret compliant, basically, that you're not going to have high carbs in them, and they're going to have enough protein that you know that they're a good option, even if they're a vegetarian option. I'm not the best person to ask about cooking meat. My husband would be the person that needs to do a show about cooking meat. I'm vegetarian, so that's not my expertise. But one of the things that I will say is most of your main dishes with meat, if you're not adding starches, if you're not adding rice or pasta, for instance, to that meal, if it's predominantly, say, a hamburger meal, or you're not mixing other starches with it, you're going to have a high protein part of your meal from a meat product, depending on what you mix it with. So with vegetarians, the trick is that there are a lot of really unhealthy vegans and vegetarians because they're eating super high carbs, right? So their protein content hasn't matched their carbs, and then they get to be what we call skinny fat, where they're storing a lot of fat, even if their weight looks normal. So I'm going to be sending out some vegetarian recipes that are helpful because, for instance, there's a veggie meatloaf that we make a lot of times in our family that you can adapt to either be gluten-free or dairy-free, depending on your preference, but has a higher volume of protein in it from using some of the faux meats, like Trader Joe's has one that's called beefless ground round. And then now there's a lot of different companies, Gardein and Light Life and Beyond Meat, all make nice kind of veggie protein options that you can cook with. And if you're trying to make either a meatless Monday and reduce your meat consumption in a week, or if you're just looking for some alternatives that are decent protein balanced meals that fit within that 15-gram secret kind of protocol, these will be some easy options. So look for one that's called, we call it veggie meatloaf, although we kind of have made up all kinds of names for it. But it's like a meatloaf that's easy, and it even tastes good in a sandwich if you want it that way later. Although, I forgot that I don't eat sandwiches when I just said that. That's pretty funny. That's how ingrained it gets in our society. It's like we all grew up eating sandwiches. Now what I tend to do is I reheat it with just a salad on the side, but if you were packing a sandwich for somebody, it would be good in there. Otherwise, another recipe book or comment that I want to make, there's another recipe book I love that, if you don't mind swear words, this is a great book. This book is called The Thug Kitchen, and it's all kinds of ways to do great, healthy vegetarian cooking. Some of it tends to be grain heavy, so I've adapted a lot out of that book. But one of the things that that book has taught us in our family is how to do baked tofu. And so the marinades in this book for baked tofu are really great. And basically you mix up a marinade and you slice your tofu into 1/4-inch slices. And when you do that, you can marinate the tofu into the marinade, for 2 to 3 hours. and then you lay it out on a cookie sheet in the oven. And you'll end up having a really nice, a little bit more chewiness to the tofu instead of sort of the, you know how tofu by itself, if you're just holding plain tofu, it's kind of like a weird texture. It's just soft and you can mash it in your hand. So the baked tofu out of Thug Kitchen is a recipe I'm going to include in our recipe list this week. Because if you do that, let's say on Sunday you bake up a couple batches of tofu, you can put that in the fridge and it makes a great topping for your salads. Or if you were going to make a veggie stir fry, you just throw your prepared tofu in that and it has flavor. And you can eat it plain if you just needed an extra snack, or stack it with a tomato and a cucumber, for instance, if you wanted to. So that baked tofu happens to be a really handy thing to prep ahead for a week. The other thing I was going to say about tofu, and I'll make sure this recipe is also in your list when we send it out, is it's easy to make a fake egg salad with tofu. And so that ends up being something that's really easy to eat with cucumbers, or a seed type cracker like a Mary's Gone cracker for a healthy little snack during the week. So I'll send that recipe out too because it's really easy. I want to open it up. We're about 15 minutes, I think, from the hour. So I want to open it up for some questions and discussion. Let me look at the chat box and see what anybody's saying. Is there a brand of tofu I recommend? Well, I'll tell you what Robert's favorite is, and I don't have a specific brand, but there's some things about tofu that are reasonable to kind of look for. One is always look for organic tofu. Soy happens to be one of the most genetically modified products in our country. Most of soy in our country goes for animal feed, and that means that if you're eating a grain-fed cow or chicken, that you're also getting that GMO soy, for instance, or GMO wheat or corn. So organic, number one. Number two, look at the protein content on your tofu package. Typically, the firm tofu will be higher in protein content, so I tend to get firm. I don't usually get the ultra firm. I get firm because the ultra firm is a little harder for me to crumble if I was going to use it. It just is a little bit more chewy, and I tend to just like the firm texture. Robert just typed in his favorite, the organic sprouted tofu at Trader Joe's, or the high protein tofu at Trader Joe's. So the high protein one is much more firm. It's denser and it has higher protein. So it works for things like if I was going to crumble up tofu and then put taco seasoning on it and sort of saute it up to be my taco filling in say a taco salad, I would use that firm tofu. Whereas the sprouted tofu has a little bit of a nicer texture for baking. It's not quite as firm as that high protein one. But yeah, I think just any organic tofu you can find is probably okay. And I would just encourage you to do some experimentation. This last summer, I was wanting something that would be like a fudgesicle. And I was like, okay, how am I going to make fudgesicles better in the protein content? And I didn't want to just make them out of protein powder because I didn't want to just taste only protein powder. And what I ended up doing was using one block of tofu that I drained and rinsed, and the protein powder that has the MCT oil in it, and some coconut milk. And I blended that, and then poured that into popsicle pops, and those were great. And everybody liked them, and the kids ate them, and I ate them, and they tasted good, and they were a high protein snack. So that's another good one. You can pull the wool over your kids' eyes with chocolate pops sometimes. Dick, you're asking a good question here. How much collagen protein should I eat each day, and what kind, and can you use it in the recipes? So collagen protein, you absolutely can use as your protein source. So you could put collagen protein in your baked goods. You could put it in, you actually can stir your collagen protein into your coffee or your shake. It's really easy to use. It dissolves nicely. The biggest issue with the collagen protein is I would use that for one of my meal replacements or one of my times of protein fueling. So generally that's going to be about 10 to 12 grams of protein. Like when I have a shake, I want about 10 to 12 grams of protein if I'm using it for one of my five time a day eating. If I'm eating a little bigger breakfast, lunch, and dinner, I'll even make a bigger protein shake in maintenance. Those of you that are on program, you'd want to use an Optavia shake because of its balance. So the collagen protein, I would tell you about 12 grams is kind of maximal. And that is not based on a ton of literature. It's based on a concept. And the concept is this: most collagen protein on the market that is out there as a protein source. So brands that we all see that I think are good brands, you know, Bulletproof and Dr. Axe, most of those are still really large molecules of collagen, which means they've been bound to hydroxyproline. And hydroxyproline, with long-term use, when it breaks apart from the collagen, it stores in our body and can kind of make it more prone to get kidney stones. So using, you know, a scoop, a 12-gram amount of collagen protein a day seems to be a safe amount in all the literature that I can find. And the collagen that we use at our house, actually, we've shifted over to one from Orthomolecular, which is a kind of a professional grade supplement company, because theirs is already pre-hydrolyzed and has the hydroxyproline removed, and it's tiny molecules of it, so it gets into the joints better. But it can be used in the coffee or in a recipe as well. It's just a little smaller amount as well. Any question about recipes? One of the things, if you have a favorite recipe that you're curious if it's possible to adapt, and I'm opening myself up for something here, so be kind to me. Don't send me like Baked Alaska, where it's ice cream in the whole Baked Alaska, ice cream and angel food cake. Not sure I can do that one. But if there's something that you have a question about and you wonder if it's a possible recipe to adapt, feel free to send it to us this week. Be happy to look at it and see if some little tweaks that are things we've learned by experience would be ways you could make something that's, you know, a fun and favorite for your family. And then the other thing that we want to just let you know is next week, which is the 4th week of Fall into Fat Burning, we're going to recap all of this and we're going to talk about eating on the go. So what do you do in a restaurant? You know, how are we going to read the restaurant menus to still stay within our 15-gram secret kind of guidelines? And then also, what else can you do if you're at Starbucks? We know that certainly the little egg bites are a good option at Starbucks, but what else can you do? You know, what are the other options when you're reading the labels in somewhere that's a quick fast food type of a place? So next week we'll be doing eating on the go, and Dick, you and Shauna are uniquely qualified to actually help me next week because you've taught eating on the go with me in the past, so I may tap into some of your expertise. And certainly this week, watch for, and it's going to take us a couple days to pull them together because I continually am working on these recipes, so I have a couple new ones I want to make sure we put out with you with the email this week. And then watch for next week that come on with us and let's look at eating on the go. The other thing I just want to say, because we're kind of halfway through September, is if you're interested in doing the Optavia program, please reach out to us. The nice thing about that program, many of you on the Zoom these weeks have either been on or are using the Optavia program. And the thing about the Optavia program, as much as I'm teaching you in these 3 to 4 weeks some of the principles that will allow you to adhere to a program long term when you're in maintenance and when you're trying to figure out how do you live out there, you know, for the long term on keeping your blood sugar steady and keeping your weight steady. Despite that being the focus of this group, what I want to tell you is your fastest way to a predictable outcome is actually to get onto a structured eating program like Optavia. It just is a really simple way that if everything we're talking about sounds a little bit like, oh my goodness, this is a bit overwhelming, you know, I'm finding that I can't cook this much, or our family is traveling and it's not working to do this easily when we're traveling because I don't know how to do it. Or for me, for instance, this last, you know, depending on the Sunday, there's some Sundays I'm at home and I can cook, and there's other Sundays that I'm not. And if I don't have time to prep, that week I eat more Optavia. It's kind of what ends up happening. It's my fallback. So what we're kind of trying to do with this program, with these 4 sections, is teach you things that will allow you to know how to do this yourself. But if you're looking for a way to lose weight, just know that you can reach out to us or a health coach that invited you to this Zoom and get to know Optavia, because it's your quickest way to a predictable result. Eve just texted in on the chat let's see what this says. I don't know if this works, but Whole Foods has cauliflower nachos. Cauliflower with tempura flakes, avocado cream, salsa, cilantro, lime, jalapenos. Oh my goodness, you're making me hungry, Eve. I think I need to come to Hawaii and have some of those with you. That sounds great, actually. And I think the thing that I'm looking for in that, the great thing is the tempura flakes add protein. So tempura is a great protein option. You can slice it up like the shape of French fries and then literally season it up and bake it and make your own little French fry sticks with tempura. They must be making it into flakes, which that's a protein add to the cauliflower nachos. The avocado cream is a freebie on your blood sugar. The salsa is a freebie on your blood sugar. So is the cilantro, lime, and jalapeno. So that's great. You've got your veggie and the cauliflower, which is a low-carb veggie. You've got the protein in the tempura flakes, and then some healthy fats and healthy condiments on the side. That's exactly right. Eve, you're thinking exactly right down the correct sort of mindset there. And let's say it didn't have tempura flakes, a couple other things. Cheese sometimes can add a little bit of protein to that mix. Another maintenance style nacho would be to slice sweet potatoes really thin. Aiden, our daughter this summer, figured this one out and would make sweet potato nachos if you're trying to avoid corn tortillas. Those were really good as well. And then we would put either black beans or a ground round, like a veggie beef on it to get the extra protein on those. And then Robert's secret hack, yep, this is what we had for dinner a couple nights ago. If you crumble your tofu first, and this is, if you have tofu, like I buy tofu at Costco where you get like 4 or 6 little packets of tofu there with their organic tofu. And sometimes it'll sit in the cupboard and I'm like, in the fridge. And I'll be like, oh my goodness, that's gonna expire and I don't wanna throw this tofu away. So drain your tofu, crumble it up, and then you can put it in baggies in the freezer. So 1 Ziploc bag's worth is a couple, put a couple pieces or a couple, what do you call them, blocks or bricks of tofu already crushed into the freezer. And then when you pull them out, that texture will have changed a little bit and it makes it more chewy so that you actually can, it seems more like a veggie meat. It seems more like taco meat. So Robert seasons that up really well with taco seasoning. And that pre-frozen tofu makes a really quick dinner for us. We just pull it out of the freezer. He kind of runs the bag under hot water and then breaks it up and puts it in a pan with some taco seasoning. And it works out great. It's an easy little hack. Even people that eat meat won't notice. Yeah, exactly. Friends taught us that are not necessarily fully vegetarian. So it was an easy find. The other thing just to notice, tacos are another good topic. What can you do instead of a tortilla? And so one of the things, we have one health coach in Optavia who's done an amazing job making tacos out of either jicama or cauliflower. That's an option to do some experimentation there. But the other thing, there's 2 other options that I think are easy. The easiest one is lettuce, like butter lettuce leaves. Another would be to get a really round eggplant and slice it fairly thin, like about 1/4 inch thick or a little thinner, and then pre-bake those slices of eggplant. And you can make pretty decent taco shells out of eggplant. You don't want them to get hard, you just want to keep them soft. And then the other thing I had said to Robert this week that I want to try is collard greens. I'm thinking that if you could cut a circle out of collard greens, you could make a decent little wrap type of a substitute. And if you are eating the taco shells, the corn tortilla is probably going to cause you less harm than the flour tortilla. But still, when you're on program, that's a great thing to avoid just so you don't get the extra carbs. Easy way to make it into a bowl, like a taco salad bowl, or use one of these other hacks for your tortilla is a reasonable thing to do. Any other comments before we close tonight? Shauna says, nice. Melted Parmesan folded over a bowl to form. Whoa, that sounds good, Shauna. So my question on that, I'm imagining you probably take something like either a Silpat or a parchment paper and put a little pile of Parmesan, like maybe you're gonna make 6 piles of Parmesan on that deal, on your cookie sheet, and then melt it. And while it's still soft, I think I've seen you do this, Shauna. I think you, at that point, put a little spatula under the really soft melty cheese and lift it before it fully gets hard, and then let it drape over a bowl so that it makes your taco shell, kind of an idea. Okay.
Right. You just don't want to let it get too hard or try to move it when it's too soft. But you'll know,
Really
you'll know right away. You get instant feedback on that.
If it's falling apart, it's too soft, and if it's like a brick, it's too hard or crispy. Right. Then you have Parmesan crisps if it's crispy. You got it. Cool. Thank you. Okay, well, we're going to sign off, and next week we'll be looking at eating on the go. This is the famous Shauna, who she and Dick have done a lot of expert work around eating on the go that fits with the 15-gram secret. They're part of our practice and tasting crew. So we'll see each other again next week. Thanks, everybody. Have a super week, and thanks for being with us.